All right, welcome and felcha to Random Thoughts from County Antrim here in Michigan on this, the 25th day of July, 2021. I'm your host, David McDonnell. It's my half hour of some yarns, some stories, historical information, and as always, my random thoughts. Now, the news this week. It's the same as the last week, and the same as the week before, and probably the same as next week. And that is that there are many people, most people are being very, very smart. But many people are being very, very stupid. And the result of which this pandemic is still in full force. And we may be in for a difficult fall, or even a difficult rest of summer. It's kind of ironic that the people who seem to have complained the loudest about having to wear a mask, or schools not being fully open for in-person learning, and the economy not being fully opened, are also the same people who are refusing to get a vaccine. And thus they're forcing all of us to continue wearing masks. They're endangering the ability of schools to reopen in the fall, and they're preventing the economy from fully opening up. Anyway, that's my rant and my random thought for today. What I really wanted to do today is tell you a story. The story I want to tell you, let me have a sip of coffee before I do. The story I wanted to tell you is entitled Fair, Brown, and Trembling. And I may actually only tell you the first part of the story. It's really 3, maybe 2.5 distinct stories. And I'll see how much time I have left to do the last part, but definitely want to tell you the first part. And I think you'll recognize it. Now, the king of Tyrconnell at the time had 3 daughters, Fair, Brown, and Trembling. And the king was quite attentive in his duties. And so he gave his daughters the responsibility for managing the household. And this meant that the 2 eldest daughters, Fair and Brown, took charge, much to the neglect of Trembling. Although the king, I must say, was unaware of this. Because you see, Trembling was by far the most beautiful, much more beautiful than her elder sisters. And they were in dread. The elder sisters were in dread that Trembling may get married first. Now, for example, Fair and Brown went to church every Sunday, and they always wore a fine new dress. And Trembling was kept home to do the housework. In fact, Trembling wasn't even allowed to leave the house ever. And this kept on for many years. And there was a prince of the neighboring kingdom who later fell in love with Fair, the eldest sister. And one Sunday morning, Fair and Brown got dressed up to go to church because the prince was supposed to be there. And Fair was looking forward to meeting the prince yet again. So she put on her finest dress. And when they left, an old henwife came into the kitchen and said to Trembling, "It is church where you ought to be, instead of working at home." To which Trembling replied, "How could I go? I have no clothes good enough to wear to church. And if my sisters saw me, they would kill me for leaving the house." And the henwife said, "Well, I'll give you a finer dress than either of them have, and finer than anybody has ever seen. And what dress would you like?" Well, Trembling, given this question, delved into her fantasy and said, "I'll have a dress as white as snow, and green shoes for my feet." So the henwife put on a cloak, and she mumbled some words which Trembling could not understand. And with that, the whitest and most beautiful gown appeared, together with a pair of green shoes. Now Trembling put on the dress and shoes, and as you might expect, she looked beautiful. So the henwife then said, outside is a white mare with a golden saddle. You must go to church, but you must not go inside the church door. The minute people rise up from the mass, you must ride home as fast as the mare will carry you. So Trembling did as she was told. She rode the mare to the church. She got off the mare, ran onto the church door, but did not go inside. Now, everyone inside turned to look at her, get a glimpse of her, and they wanted to know who she was. But when Mass ended, they ran to overtake her, but it was no use. Trembling ran much faster, got on her mare, and took off as fast as the mare would take her. She overtook the wind before her, and she outstripped the wind behind her, and she got home quite quickly. Now, when she arrived home, the henwife had already prepared dinner, which otherwise would have been Trembling's task. She took off her white dress, her green shoes, and put on her old clothes, all in a twinkling. Now, it wasn't too long after that before the two sisters came home. And they immediately told the henwife, he says, we saw a grand lady at church today. She had a dress the like of which we have never seen before. There was not a man at church that was not trying to look at her and find out who she was. Now the next Sunday, the two sisters went to church again. And they tried to look as beautiful as they could, as beautiful as the mysterious woman was the week before. Although, truth be told, they could not do so. And after they had gone, the henwife came to Trembling and says, will you go to church again? Trembling said, I would if I could. So the henwife asked, what dress would you like to wear? And Trembling says, a fine black satin dress with red shoes for my feet. And what color for your mare? Asked the henwife. And he said, a black mare with skin so glossy I could see myself in it. The henwife then put on her cloak yet again, mumbled a few words, and within moments a beautiful black satin dress appeared with a pair of red shoes. And Trembling looked out the door, and there was a black mare with glossy skin standing right outside the door. Now the henwife again told Trembling not to go inside the church and rush away as soon as Mass ended. And that Sunday morning, people at the church were as astonished as ever, because everybody wanted to know who was this woman standing at the door of the church. But they had no chance to find out, because as soon as the Mass ended, she rushed out of the church door, jumped onto the saddle, and rode back on her black mare before any man could stop her. And again, the henwife had dinner waiting, and Trembling changed out of her black satin dress and into her old clothes. Now when the sisters returned, they said again, we saw a grand, strange lady today. No man could think of our dresses after looking at that black satin dress. Everyone sat with their mouths open, gazing at her, and no man was looking at us. Now the third Sunday came, and the two sisters went off to church yet again, each wearing a black satin dress, and Trembling was left to work in the kitchen. And as always, she was told by her sister to have dinners ready when Mass was over. Now, after the sisters left and were out of sight, the henwife said to Trembling, well, dear, are you ready for church today? I would be, said Trembling, if I had a dress to wear. Well, I will give you any dress you ask for, said the henwife. And Trembling said, I would like a dress as red as a rose from the waist down, and white as snow from the waist up, and a cape of green for my shoulders, and shoes with red toes, and white in the middle, and black at the ends, and black heels. And for my hat, I would like a hat with white, red, and green feathers in it. That's what I would like for church today. So the henwife put on her cloak, mumbled a few words, and everything Trembling asked for appeared. And the henwife asked, what kind of mare would you like? To which Trembling replied, a white mare with gold spots. And with that, a mare appeared right at the front door, exactly as requested. Now by then, the fame of this beautiful, strange lady had spread throughout Ireland. And all of the princes and all the great men of Ireland came to that church that Sunday, each hoping that it would be he who would take this lady home with him. And by this time, the prince, who had been in love with Fair, forgot about this eldest sister completely. He remained outside the church during the Mass so as to catch a look at this strange lady before she could hurry away. Now, the church was more crowded than ever that Sunday. It was packed inside, but there was twice as many people outside than there were inside. There were so many people that Trembling could not get inside or get to the church door. Instead, she got off her mare, opened the gate of the church on the outside, and stood at the gate. Now, as soon as Mass ended, Trembling slipped through the gate, jumped on the horse, and the white mare with the gold spots, and rode away ahead of the wind. Now, despite her haste and her speed, the prince was at her side. He seized her by the foot and ran as fast as the mare for quite some time. But the prince eventually had to stop running. He wasn't as fast or as durable as the mare, and he did not succeed in catching Trembling. But he did succeed in removing one of her shoes from her feet. Now, Trembling went as fast as she could home, and she was a little nervous because she was worried about losing a shoe. And seeing her so vexed when she got home, the henwife said, what is the trouble with you now? And Trembling said, I lost one of the shoes off my feet. Don't mind, said the henwife. Maybe it's for the best. The Trembling quickly changed her clothes and looked plain again by the time the sisters returned from Mass. And when the sisters returned, they told the henwife, strange lady came again, even grander than before. She wore the most brilliant colors ever, and she was herself the most beautiful woman ever seen by man in Ireland. That's what they said. Now, after Trembling had disappeared from the church, the prince said to all, I will have that lady as my wife. To which someone replied, you do not win her just by stealing her shoe. You'll have to win her by the sword. You'll have to fight with us before you can call her your wife. Well then, said the prince, then when I find the lady who fits in the shoe, I will fight for her. And by now, every man in Ireland was anxious to find out who this lady was. And men traveled all over Ireland, north, south, east, west. They visited every place where a woman was to be found, and no house in Ireland was left unsearched. But it was the prince who kept the shoe. And whenever a young woman saw the prince with the shoe, she had great hopes that it would be of proper size. There was one story of a woman who, to fit in the shoe, cut off her big toe. Drastic as that may sound. There's another story of women who would stick something in their stockings to make their shoes a little bit bigger at the tip of the shoe so they would fit. But it was no use. Wherever the prince went, no one fit inside that shoe properly. Now the two sisters, Fair and Brown, they heard of men looking high and low for the woman who would fit inside the shoe. And both of them were anxious to try on the shoe. But Trembling actually had enough nerve to speak up, and she said, "Maybe it is my foot that the shoe will fit." The sisters, of course, laughed, and one said, "Why say you so when you were home every Sunday?" Now, not long after that, as you might guess, the prince appeared at their door. And the sisters, when they saw the prince there, took Trembling and put her in a closet and locked the door of the closet. Now, when the prince entered the house with the shoe, he gave the shoe to each sister one at a time. And although they tried and tried, it would fit neither of them. So the prince said, "Is there any other young woman in the house?" And then in the background he heard, "There is. I'm in here." That was a voice from the closet. Now the sisters objected, but the prince insisted that he would not leave until he had seen her. So the sisters had no choice but to open the door and let Trembling out. And when Trembling came out, the shoe was given to her, and it fit exactly. So the prince said, "You are the woman the shoe fits, and you are the woman I took the shoe from." "And yes, I am, said Trembling. "Wait here, and I will show you." So then Trembling went to the house of the henwife. The henwife put on a cloak, did her mumbling, and Trembling came out dressed the same way she was on that first Sunday, riding on a white mare. And all who saw her agreed she was the lady at the church that first Sunday. Trembling went back to the henwife. Henwife put the cloak on, mumbled her words, and Trembling came back, dressed exactly the way she was on that second Sunday, riding on the black mare with the glossy skin. And all who saw her agreed she was the lady at the church on that second Sunday. And she went back to the henwife yet again, put on the cloak, mumbled the words, and boom, Trembling comes running out of the house, dressed exactly as she was on that third Sunday, riding a white mare with gold spots. And there was no doubt whatsoever. Trembling was the lady who was at the church on those 3 Sundays. And Trembling and the prince were soon married, with a marriage feast which lasted many, many days. Now that's the first part of the story. There's more to come if I have time, but as I said, that's the first part. That story, Fair, Brown, and Trembling, was collected by 2 19th century folklorists. One was Jeremiah Curtin, in a book called Myths and Folklores of Ireland, written in the late 19th century. Curtin was actually born in Detroit to Irish parents, and he traveled around a lot in Ireland and collecting folklore. He also did the same thing in the U.S., and he collected a lot of folklore from various Native American tribes. A second book where that was collected, also written in the 19th century, was by Joseph Jacobs, called Celtic Fairy Tales. Now that tale, unless you've had your head in a hole someplace, you should recognize that as a Cinderella tale. And I found references to, and then actually read the article, as an 1879 magazine which documented the many, many variants of the Cinderella tales, and thousands of these stories. And the earliest known variant was recounted somewhere between the years 7 BC and 23 AD. And that's when it was recounted. So the story obviously is even older than that, more than 2,000 years old. And that story was about a Greek slave who married the king of Egypt. Now, obviously, that Greek slave had a pretty unique shoe size, even back then. Now, the German version of that story was collected by the Brothers Grimm and published by them in 1812. And it's that German version was the one that was adapted by Disney. And that's the version we're more familiar with. But when you think of that Disney version, understand that it's one of many, many versions of that kind of story. Now, before I move on, I wanted to mention the hen wife. You might be asking yourself, what the heck is a hen wife? Well, a hen wife literally is a woman who takes care of chickens. But in Celtic folklore and fairy tales, it's really a woman who has some sort of healing power or some kind of magical powers. It's unlike a witch, which kind of lives in the woods all alone. Henwife lives in the village and near the premises, often married, often has children. It's just a part of the community. But she takes care of chickens, and she has some sort of special powers. You see her depicted in fairy tales, illustrated fairy tales, as the elderly woman with a white apron. Almost always, henwife has a white apron. And often in these stories, the heroine goes to the henwife for some eggs, and she returns with much, much more than she bargained for. All right, well, I got a little bit of time, so let me just tell you the middle part of the story, just to tell you what it was about. The middle part's about the fight. When Trembling appeared for the third time and the prince claimed her as his bride, a terrible fight ensued. And one by one, the prince fought off everyone else who wanted to marry Trembling. One fight, according to the one story, lasted for 9 hours, and the fighting went on for days and days and days. And eventually the prince won, and he and Trembling were married. And that's an interesting part of the story, but it's not near as fascinating to me as the Cinderella story. And the story, there's the versions of this seem to go on, and there's yet a third part of the story that takes place after Trembling and the prince were married. And one day when the prince was away, Trembling and her sisters took a long walk along the coast. And they were along the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. And when they came close to the cliff, Fair pushed Trembling over the side. And if that wasn't enough, with Trembling in the water, a great whale came by and swallowed Trembling whole. Now, as it happened, a small boy who was taking care of his cows saw all of this happen. And the next day, when the tide came in, the boy saw the whale swim to shore and kind of spit up, cough up, Trembling onto the beach. So the boy rushed to Trembling, who told him, he said, "Tell my husband that my sister pushed me off the cliff into the sea and that a whale swallowed me. He threw me out in the tide, and he will return to swallow me again. He will do this 3 times. And while I am under his spell, I cannot escape by myself, and I cannot leave this beach. And unless my husband saves me before I am swallowed a 4th time, I shall be lost." Now the boy went home. According to the story, he had a drink on the way, and then never did go back to see the prince. But he did go back to the beach with the next high tide, and there's the whale comes up, coughs up, trembling. He runs down. She tells him, she asked him, did you tell my husband to do, and did you do what I asked? And he said, no, I forgot. But the boy then immediately left, and he found the prince, and he told him the whole tale. And the prince immediately went to the beach. And when the whale returned at the next high tide, the whale threw Trembling back on the beach. The prince went out into the water with his sword and killed the whale. And when he returned home, he put Fair in a barrel together with some provisions and threw her out to sea. And no one ever saw Fair ever again. Now the prince and Trembling raised the young boy as if they were own, because it is as if they were their own, because he did save Trembling from the whale. And the prince and Trembling later had a daughter. And the young boy who saved Trembling from the whale later married the daughter. And the young boy and the daughter and the prince and Trembling lived happily thereafter until each of the four of them died from old age. Now that's the last part of the story. And again, it's an interesting story, but it's not near as fascinating to me as the Cinderella story. But that last part is similar to many, usually referred to as sea maiden stories, or many sea maiden stories in Celtic folklore, particularly Scottish folklore. So there are you find many sea maiden stories, often where they're swallowed by a whale, or rescued, or put under a spell by a big fish. So please, that's the end of my podcast today. Take a look at clandonald.net. Send me an email at clandonald@gmail.com. Like and share my Facebook page. Please like this video and leave some comments. I've noticed some people have been making comments on my videos and my podcast, and I love it. Thank you so much. Keep them coming, positive or negative or neutral. I don't care. Just watch and comment. So that's it for today. We'll see you all in August.